Thank you, General. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Mon français c'est un peu rouillé, alors je dois parler en anglais avec votre permission. So that I understand, if you understand me well, may I run a mini poll and ask you to kindly raise your hands to show me who's been to Turkey, who knows Turkey? Well, that's quite an impressive yes vote for my country. Thank you for that. Well, those of you who've been know that we are in a difficult part of the neighborhood. My distinguished colleague, the Ambassador of Norway, described northern flank view. I'll try to touch upon the southern flank. I come from the southern flank, so of course, naturally, whatever I say reflects our experience. And maybe I want to touch upon a few things to give you some food for thought and encourage you to ask questions. Please ask any questions, the tougher the better. And maybe we'll spice up the discussion. Where I come from, in our part of the world, as you are seeing on the screens here, the threats are various. When, as General Thibault said, I joined the ministry 33 years ago and served in the NATO department, the lines were very clear. The answer, where do we hold up our shield? It was very simple to answer. It was the Warsaw Pact. The lines were very clear. The threat was clear, so we knew what to do, and everything was quite stagnant, which was a nice thing, actually, looking back to those old days. But since then, things have evolved quite a bit, and we have new challenges. So the higher the threat, the more vigorous the response. We have to come up with new answers. And from where I come from, we feel like we have a shield, but there are arrows raining from all directions, so we have to use that shield in a very active way. And we also have to rest on our own laurels, not only on NATO, and when necessary to counter these threats. Just to name a few, and I'll open this up a bit in my conversation with you. Refugees. Refugees now is there, it's an opportunity, but it's also a threat. With it has a heavy security angle. We have, if you think of our neighborhood, you visualize the map, you see we have our immediate neighbors are Syria, Iraq, Iran, which are, of course, I need not tell you how problematic our relations are and the threats we are countering. We are building a border wall along 1,000 kilometers of our Middle Eastern border. This is a new challenge for security, for refugees. We have, of course, Daesh, ISIS. This is an emerged threat which we all had to deal with, and now it's subsiding, but I think it's still there's a little way to go on that. We face terrorism, as you know, according to NATO and the EU and the US, the PKK is a proscribed terrorist organization. We've been fighting them for 30 years, since '84, more than 30 actually. We have foreign terrorist fighters, which are going through our borders, our airports, which is a new threat. We have emerging new relations between NATO and the EU, which we must also look at. We have also our national issues, and I know we are not on the same page with everyone about this, but the Gülenist threat, FETÖ. FETÖ, you might say, well, that doesn't fit a terrorist organization or a security threat. Well, for us it does, because they carried out a coup in my country a couple of years ago. They killed 250 people, wounded 2,000, they bombed parliament, they tried to kill the president. So if you ask me, they are quite a threat. Actually, if I go a bit more into this, our Prime Minister used to define the Gülenists, FETÖ, as terrorism 4.0. Like today, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, These are Industry 4.0. According to us, Château is 4.0, terrorism 4.0. It's a new kind of threat, and I think I would leave this idea with you. Maybe you should look at it. It's intellectually challenging because it's a global organization. It has global ambitions. It comes in as a friendly cult, maybe, but the reality behind the scenes is quite serious. And I encourage you to look at this more. To give you some food for thought on the threats I just mentioned, we have Daesh, ISIS, and between the year 2014 to 17, we had 20 terror attacks in Turkey, resulting in the killing of 316 Turkish citizens. Now, I hear or read in the press that Turkey is soft with Daesh, they don't do enough. This is not true. Only last year we did 1,130 sweeps against Daesh in our own country and maybe immediately beyond our border. And we had 4,000 Daesh terrorists neutralized. So this is a big number by any standard. On the PKK in 2018, our armed forces carried out 87,000 operations. This is again a big number, I'm sure you will acknowledge. And we neutralized 1,257 terrorists, 628 of them were killed, 272 were arrested, and 357 of them surrendered. So this is for us not only a threat within our own country, but also beyond our borders, which brings us to Syria and Iraq. Syria at the forefront. This is a dynamic issue, as we all know. It interests us all. We might not be on the same page on everything, but of course NATO is still our pillar. And don't believe if anyone says that the Turks are getting cold feet, they are going their own way, they are too cozy with the Russians and the Iranians, they are carrying out operations in Syria. These are all true, but NATO remains as our main pillar. And this is not our relations as we are speaking. I think we have a meeting in Sochi, which is a continuation of the Astana process. We have a major meeting, and we are discussing with our Russian and Iranian counterparts what to do over there. But this is by no means an alternative to NATO. It's, we would think, complementary, and it's not a choice, it's a necessity. Because we have to deal with these issues. We have to tackle Daesh, we have to tackle the PKK, we have to bring peace to Syria, we have to stabilize the region. If not, it's going to be a big problem for us. And I hear discussions that, for example, the possibility of big refugee waves has subsided and everything is stable. And I see our European counterparts tend to forget this as a dynamic issue, contrary to how it was a couple of years ago or 3 years ago. But I think this is still very relevant, and it very closely feeds into Syria. The Idlib pocket is the place where I would watch in the forthcoming year, and we are watching it with concern. And if we are to keep that place stable, we need to work with our Russian and Iranian counterparts, because they are there, they are a reality on the ground. If things do go wrong in that pocket, I think the outcome will interest us all, NATO and all NATO members, and all non-NATO European members, because our expectation is for our realistic scenario is for 2 million people to hit the road. And that would be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because we are already trying to cater for 4 million refugees. This is, again, a big number. And we, by keeping them stable and in our country, we've spent up to today $30 billion out of our coffers, and we are not a rich nation. So I plead with you to visualize this and the problems it brings with it. This means hundreds of thousands of children in schools, millions of people in our hospitals, in our health system. I know Canada is a compassionate country. You are doing your bit. You welcomed tens of thousands of Syrians, and you're looking after them like we are for the millions of them. So you know what the challenges are, and multiply these with a few hundred. So this we have to deal with. It's also a security issue, but I think we're doing a good job. And so far we are taking care of them. They are in their everyday life. They are not a problem for society. They are Pacific people, good people. But we eventually want them to go back. We cannot carry this burden forever. Neither can we carry another 2 million. So if Idlib indeed destabilizes, I think this will very rapidly break the already fragile EU-Turkey refugee agreement, which, if you ask me, is more psychological than real. But if necessity dictates and hundreds of thousands or more people hit the roads, it's going to break this system, and once the psychological deterrent is lost, they are going to hit the roads. When I was ambassador in Greece, we had a terrible time. Every day, 500, 1,000 people were crossing into Greek islands. Of course, we were blamed for, encouraging them or allowing them to do so. We had another view, of course, but it was the reality of the day. Hundreds of people were dying in the seas, children washing up on our shores, very bitter days. And we managed, and our embassy also contributed a lot to that agreement. We actually designed it in Athens. So take it from me. This is a good agreement, it's working for the time being, but I wouldn't take it for granted, and it's in our joint interest, and I think this is a threat, and tomorrow it will turn into a security threat if this situation turns around. So we all have to jointly work together to stabilize Syria and also Iraq and counter the threats in our region. A couple of words about foreign terrorist fighters. In Turkey, we have foreign terrorist fighters from, and I know this interests Canada a lot because you have some going in that part of the world and doing not very clever things, not up to any good. And it's in the press recently. We have foreign terrorist fighters from 120 countries, but we have a very effective system in Turkey, which we call the risk analysis units. These are in 30 provinces, in 64 locations. They are at bus stations, in airports, in ports, in places where people cross. And we have our own indigenous software and criteria to weed out these foreign terrorist fighters. And I think we're doing quite a good job. Since 2014, we have checked roughly 26,500 passengers. But think of, the numbers might sound big, but think of the fact that last year, in the first 10 months, we got 41 million tourists. So the machine is big, and a lot of people are passing through our airports. Weeding out and focusing on 26,500 people, I think is a good job. We interviewed 18,000 of them, a bit deeper and actively. And of these, we deported 8,300. As of November 2018, we have a no-entry list to our country of 70,000 people from all around the globe, not just Canada, of course, but all around. We have 1,000 FTFs jailed in Turkey. So far, 21 have come from Canada. And there are 225 Canadian FTFs in our list. So these are some figures for you. I want to say a few words also about the transatlantic link, and it is under strain, as we all know. The Trump administration made it very clear that they expect all other members to chip in more, do more, but at one point due to the tweets we were receiving, there was a shadow, quite a heavy shadow. When it's the US, of course, the shadow is heavy, as the presence is. There was a big question mark and a shadow cast on the organization. Is the organization at its end? I mean, is America, the US withdrawing? Are they, going their separate ways? But thankfully, things stabilized and we see more commitment. On the other hand, we see another dynamic which we aren't very happy with as Turkey, and that is EU-NATO relations. What we want is to preserve the shared responsibility and NATO as it is, but we don't think this talk about EU strategic autonomy or an EU army are very helpful. We think the EU should complement NATO, not compete with NATO. Of course, we are not a member, so we are not party to these discussions, and we cannot determine the outcome. But I will take this opportunity to remind that, like EU initiatives like PESCO or EDF, they are not very helpful. They are not very open to discussion. So I think as non-NATO, non-EU allies, Turkey, the US and Canada, Norway perhaps, should make sure that NATO survives and we put it back on track and counter this EU's non-inclusive approach to these issues, because defense is an important issue, it's a serious issue, and once things start going wrong, it's very difficult. We don't want a Humpty Dumpty situation where all the king's men and all the king's forces cannot put Humpty Dumpty together again. We need synergy and cooperation and shared interests. A few questions maybe as food for thought. Maybe you could reflect on this. Is Turkey a valuable partner for NATO? Is the PKK and the YPG today the same organization? What would happen if Turkey wasn't so active on combating terrorism crossing through our borders and catering for all these? Sorry, that sounded like my wife, so that didn't go. And combating these refugees. And as I mentioned before, is Daesh finally finished? Can we forget about Daesh? I leave you with these questions, and I would like to once again emphasize the importance of NATO, the importance we give to it, and thank you for your patience. Thank you.